Hi, this is Miss Wright, and I am going to share my annotations for the section of our reading on page 864 to 865 called the Lotus-Eaters. And I wanted you to see what a lotus flower looks like. It's basically a water lily. In our story, it's edible. I don't know if they're really edible. You can Google it and find out. And they come in a variety of colors: bright pink, lavender, pale white, creamy colors. Um, but this is what all the fuss is about in the reading selection. Okay, so it says the Lotus Eaters. Now Zeus, the Lord of Cloud, roused in the north a storm against the ships. Odysseus has 12 ships, just to let you know. And driving veils of squall moved down like night on land and sea. The bows went plunging at the gusts, sails cracked and lashed out strips in the big wind. We saw death in that fury, dropped the yards, unshipped the oars, and pulled for the nearest lee. Then 2 long days and nights we lay offshore, worn out and sick at heart, tasting our grief until a third dawn came with ringlets shining. Then we put up our masts, hauled sail, and rested, letting the steersman and the breeze take over. I might have made it safely home that time, but as I came round Malea, the current took me out to sea, and from the north a fresh gale drove me on, past Cytherea. 9 days I drifted on the teeming sea before dangerous high winds. Upon the 10th we came to the coastline of the Lotus-Eaters, who live upon that flower. We landed there to take on water. All ships' companies mustered alongside for the midday meal. Then I sent out 2 picked men and a runner to learn what race of men that land sustained. They fell in soon enough with Lotus-Eaters, who showed no will to do us harm, only offering the sweet lotus to our friends. But those who ate this honeyed plant, the lotus, never cared to report nor to return. They longed to stay forever, browsing on the native bloom, forgetful of their homeland. I drove them all 3 wailing to the ships, tied them down under their rowing benches, and called the rest. All hands aboard! Come, clear the bench, and no one taste the lotus, or you'll lose your hope of home. Filling in their places by the rowlocks, my oarsmen dipped their long oars in the surf, and we moved out again on our seafaring. Okay, so let's go back up to the top. This is a very short selection. Beautiful poetry. And the first thing that we should notice is that we have an epithet. This is an epithet. Zeus, the Lord of Cloud. And I think I put that in my margin notes, that we have an epithet here. And an epithet is basically when you have the name of the character and then a phrase that describes the character coming directly after. And sometimes you have just the phrase standing in place of the name of the character, and it's repeated throughout the story. So something you should know about the Odyssey is that a good chunk of the Odyssey is repeated. Remember, this is a story that legend says was repeated by a blind poet, and he's using certain devices to help him remember this grand story. So one of them is called formula, and formula is when a line is repeated in whole or in part, and it's repeated verbatim. Each time the author says that or the poet says that line, he says it exactly the same. So almost 20% of the story is repetition. And then he talks about how Zeus roused the storm that came against them. We see a simile here with how the driving veils of squall moved down like night. That's a simile. We talk about the lee. The lee is the sheltered side of an island. So they were looking for the nearest island that had the lee side where they could find refuge for their boat. Their boat wouldn't be, hit against the rocks and destroyed. And as I said before, Odysseus has 12 ships that he has to think about. Um, and here it says, then 2 long days and nights we lay offshore, worn out and sick at heart. So they're upset after the storm, tasting our grief until the third dawn came, meaning the third day came. And this is another epithet. Dawn is also the goddess Aurora. She's not named Aurora in the story, but goddess Aurora is the same as the goddess of the dawn, and she is depicted with ringlets shining, and ringlets are like curls, curly hair. So one, she's obviously female, and as like a young girl with ringlets in her hair, ringlets, her hair in curls. Then we put up our mast, haul sail, and rested, letting the steersman so they need some rest. I highlighted I might have made it home safely because there's going to be several times when Odysseus is almost home, and then he's blown off course or something intervenes in to make a delay for his journey. So he says, I almost made it home that time. And you have that sense of disappointment. And he talks about he was 9 days I've drifted on the teeming sea, and until they come to the land of the Lotus-Eaters who live on that flower. And I showed you a picture of the lotus flower, which comes in many different colors. Okay. Then I sent out 2 picked men, and I highlighted this because this is a change from what he did the first stop with the Cyclones. He just let his men off the boat. They fought with the people. They enslaved the women, and this time he learns his lesson. He's not letting all of his men off the boats. And then not be able to control them. So this time he said, no, 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 no. You guys are going to stay on the boat. I'm just going to let 2 men and 1 runner go to scout out the island, find out what the people are like before I let you guys off the boat. So the runner is supposed to come back with news. So you have 2 people scouting the island, and then somebody's supposed to come back with the news to tell the boss if it's safe to get off the boat. Except that they fall in. They meet the Lotus-Eaters, and they end up falling in, meaning partying or enjoying their time with the Lotus-Eaters, which was not what they were told to do. So I have the men make a mistake. They should not. They should have kept to their orders. And it said, who showed no will to do us harm. So the Lotus-Eaters, they seem like friendly people. They're not belligerent in any way, only offering the sweet lotus to our friends. But those who ate the honeyed plant, the lotus, never cared to report nor to return. And this is important because if you become intoxicated on this plant, you won't want to go home. And their primary objective is to go home. They long to stay forever, browsing on that native bloom, forgetful of their homeland. So they might as well just give up and die at sea if they eat this plant because they'll never want to go home. I drove them all 3, right? All 3 of them, the 2 scouts and the runner, wailing. And wailing is severe crying, screaming. They were wailing to the ship. So they definitely did not want to give up their little lotus flower. He had to tie them down under their rowing benches so they wouldn't. So this is like a quick acting drug that once it was in their system, they just craved this drug. They didn't want to let it go. They didn't want to leave it behind, and they would have jumped overboard to get more of this drug and call the rest, all hands aboard, come clear the bench, and no one taste the lotus. So he's warning the other men, look, don't even think about it. Don't even think about eating this flower, because once you do, you'll lose your hope of home. And then he says the men got back in their places, they took up their oars, and they began rowing out to sea. And seafaring is another word for sailing. Okay, so here's my annotation. Seafaring means sailing. He warns the other men, which is showing signs of leadership. He's the captain. He has to not only think of himself, but of his men, even when they do the wrong thing. And I have Odysseus had to intervene because they didn't follow their orders. And problem, this is a different kind of danger. And I think that's important because normally they would be protecting themselves against people who come with swords to kill them. But no, these people come with a flower, so they feel safe. But the flower is as deadly as a sword because it will also prevent them from getting back to their home and their families. Okay, so the last thing I want you to do is when you get to page 865, make sure you answer all the check your comprehension questions and all the critical thinking questions so that you can have those ready for us at the next class. All right. Hope this wasn't too long, and I hope it's some help to you. Shout out to my great students, and I will see you back in class. Have a great day. Bye bye.